Hey friends, welcome to Bokeh, a podcast exploring the ever-blurring lines between the personal and business lives of professional photographers. This is your host, Nathan Holritz, and I'm happy that you can join me today in connecting with photographers and entrepreneurs as we discuss photography, business, and, oh yeah, that sometimes messy thing that we call life. This podcast, it's brought to you by Photographers Edit, custom image editing for the wedding and portrait photographer. Just visit photographersedit.com. All right, Bokeh Podcast listeners, thanks so much for joining us for yet another episode. And I am joined by a new friend, Karen Julia. Karen, I hesitate at new too, because it feels in some ways we've had the opportunity to connect and we've connected very naturally and very quickly. I appreciate you making time for the Bokeh Podcast today.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
And we're going to actually jump into what is really a pretty loaded topic. And I think I've said this kind of thing recently. There are certain topics that we hit here on the podcast that are, I mean, it's tough to cover them thoroughly in an hour's time frame. But I'm glad that we're going to touch on this topic of SEO. SEO, particularly in 2019, because things have changed over the last, number of years. And we're going to delve into how, and then how we can best approach SEO for the sake of growing our business. We'll get to that here in just a little bit. But before we do, I normally start the podcast with something called a technique for time. And actually, before we started recording, I was alluding to the fact that I know that you're quite an organized individual. So I'm sure this question is something that you can answer very aptly. But is there something that you do? I know that you've got a busy schedule right now, but is there something that you do amidst the busyness of running your own business, an SEO company, that enables you to have at least a little bit of space here and there for yourself or for the important people in your life?
Absolutely. So I schedule all my time into time slots. And because I have two businesses, I work in two different time zones. So I have kind of zones of space for clients to book that are based in different time zones. But I also book time aside for myself. So there's things that I do to kind of keep me centered and to give me that headspace, which I find is just crucial in terms of when you're balancing a lot of different things. So I walk like a minimum of 5 miles a day, and I book that time in every single day. So there's slots that are literally booked into my schedule for me. So they're appointments with me, if that makes sense.
It does. But, first of all, you mentioned walking, and this was something that just this week I had the experience, personal experience of getting in a lot of walking, actually close to, I think, about 30 miles. Myself and my kids, we'll just say family, we had the opportunity to go to Disney and Universal Studios, and it was, first of all, there was a lot of walking, obviously, but something that I realized is that something as simple as walking, certainly for longer distances, ideally, it's amazing the amount of exercise that you can get and how it can help your body maintain a certain lean state. You get the exercise, you encourage the metabolism. Of course, you're getting outside, exposure to the sun. We were in Florida and didn't quite get the amount of sun that I would have liked in Florida, but there's something really wonderful about that. I normally go to the gym, a little bit more intense workouts, at least with the high intensity interval sessions on the elliptical machine, but just walking, it can be in somewhat relaxing, but then simultaneously you're getting the exercise, the movement.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm just smiling at you saying about not as much sun in Florida there. You'll have got way more than, I'm based in Manchester in the UK.
Yeah.
So it's notoriously rainy. And one thing I make sure I do is, like, regardless of weather, so even if it's sideways rain, I will still do at least 3 miles. I'll still aim for 5. Yeah. So
you're just sticking like a poncho or some type of cover on and just going for it?
Well, there's a Billy Connolly quote that I like, and there's no such thing as bad weather, just a bad choice of clothing. So I just layer up, get the weatherproofs out, and it's awesome for clearing your head.
Yes.
There's nothing more invigorating, I think, than actually having rain hitting your face. And I think sometimes that connection with nature, even though I live right in the middle of the city, being able to have that kind of connection where a lot of the walks I take go around the city canals, so there's a lot of wildlife, so it's really nice to kind of have that time out connection with nature again. And I've experimented with various different things for that kind of time out over the years, like yoga, meditation. And I find like a really good long walk, honestly, it's just awesome for being able to collect your thoughts, reflect on the day, focus on the rest of the day that's coming up. So it's something I like doing in the middle of the day or kind of in that afternoon slump time.
Yeah, it's nice to break things up that way, but I'm really curious too, because I think there's a tendency in our culture, and I'll be the first to raise my hand saying that I do this kind of thing too. I need to do less of it, but there's a tendency to very quickly, if we have that so-called space, whether we're going out for a walk or we're sitting in the quiet or maybe just at a coffee shop, to quickly go to some type of distraction or way to fill in the silence. And I'm curious, and this is certainly not a criticism either way, but I'm just curious on your take. If you go out to take a walk, are you listening to music? Are you listening to audiobook? Or are you enjoying the silence and kind of getting away from it all?
I think it depends on the day and, what's going on. And maybe I like to use that opportunity to get my head back in the right place. And sometimes that's a place of focus. Sometimes it's a place of calmness. Sometimes it's a place of I need to get fired up, for having a more intense day ahead.
Yes.
So how I deal with that space is kind of influenced by kind of what headspace I'm trying to get into. So sometimes that can be not even taking my phone, leaving my apartment without my phone, which is always a bit like, oh my goodness.
Isn't it funny how we get nervous so easily that way these days?
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. It's kind of, when I hadn't done it for such a long time. And I remember the first time I'd done it and I just went out and walked. I thought, what if something happens? And I literally live in the center of a really well-populated city. It's a perfectly safe place to live. There's no reason I would need a phone.
Yeah.
So my kind of commitment though, if I'm going out and I'm having that chill out space, and I might just listen to some, like a meditation track, for example, or just some music, is my phone goes in airplane mode.
Oh, that's perfect.
So I've kind of got access to it. I can listen to a podcast or an audiobook if I want, but my thoughts aren't interrupted by the kind of the general noise of running your business, and noise sounds bad, but I think that as a business owner or owner of businesses, it's really important to actually create that space away from the various, emails and questions and the various things to just, I get so much value out of that. I think it's something that I'd highly recommend everybody does. You just need an hour a day minimum,
And that's good. And if we don't have an hour a day, there's a quote, and I'm not going to remember it exactly. I think it was Tim Ferriss that said something about how if you don't have 10 minutes a day to meditate, then you need to make some significant changes. I mean, the idea that as business owners, we would take an hour away from work to clear a mind, to get a little bit of exercise, to move, to get centered again, as you were saying earlier, I think it is more than necessary. I mean, it's vital. And yet,
absolutely vital.
Yeah, and yet I think a lot of times we don't prioritize that. So I like this reminder, and I really appreciate you kind of sharing your routine. I think it's a really, really great thing. Talk to us about an impactful book. What's one of the more impactful books that you've had the opportunity to read, whether it's on the business side or self-help side or otherwise?
Simon Sinek's Start With Why. Has been a book that I've really been able to kind of relate to and connect with. And as many people who are listening to this who are familiar with it might know of his viral YouTube video where there's a clip about him talking about the kind of why and what that means and how that kind of fits in with business owners, really.
We're talking about the kind of the driving motivation behind why we even have a business in the first place, correct?
Absolutely. And I think it's so important that business owners like photographers actually take time to identify what that is. Because when you're really clear on your why, it makes decisions way easier. Because I think making the right decision in business isn't always a black and white, definite yes or no. It's not always easy. But if you know what your why is and you're clear on your kind of overall aims for your business, it actually makes the smaller decision making, things that can sometimes consume too much time, it makes those easier.
Yes, it's so true. And when we're talking about a why, we're not talking about, I want to be an artist or I want to be a photographer. This is a much, much deeper why. I mean, something that we talk about here on the Bokeh Podcast quite a bit is this notion of a big picture view, kind of an overarching set of goals that drive certainly our personal life, but then that should naturally trickle down to the business that we create, the business model that we create, and then how we spend our day-to-day time should ultimately support that business model, and of course, ultimately the goals. And so when we're talking about a why, we're talking about going way deeper than just saying, I'm an artist or I'm a business owner or I want to take pictures, correct?
Absolutely. So it's more about your kind of core principles, really. Why do you get out of bed in the morning? What is it what type of life do you want to create for yourself? And those are the sort of questions I think it should start from, because that can then tie into how you run your business and kind of the area of the business that you specialize in. It's
so true. Yeah. It minimizes confusion, whether it comes down to the type of photography that we want to get into, or just for any entrepreneur out there, the type of business, the target clients that we want to go after, how we're going to spend our time, how much we charge. So many of these topics that in some cases can cause a little bit of confusion can be clarified if we're first clear about our why. And so this is, again, a good reminder, and we'll make sure to link to this in the show notes. By the way, for those of you listening in, make sure you take advantage of the show notes. If you go to Bokeh, Bokeh podcast.com, you can take advantage of the wealth of show notes that Haley has put together with these episodes that we're putting out very regularly now. At the moment, 3 a week. So take advantage for sure. Let's jump to the next question, though. From all that you've learned as a business owner thus far, if you had 15 seconds to share a piece of advice with a fellow business owner, what would that piece of advice be?
The focus should be on systems rather than kit. I think a tendency of photographers is to focus on what lens, what camera, when really for you to be able to deliver on your why, you need systems in place and a framework that makes sense, and is profitable where you're aiming to be. And it's less about right now and more about the business that you're planning for. And I see a lot of photographers don't plan for that. I think that's the biggest thing that you could do that would make a biggest difference to your business. Is get the contracts in place first, get the systems in place, get the workflows in place.
And so just to push back kind of on the side of the photographers, particularly those who feel like they're artist types and this notion of structure and organization and systems is a foreign concept or something that just kind of turns them off. They're not interested. How would you respond to them? How can you maybe be a photographer and an artist and also effectively put even basic systems in place so that you can, as you said, deliver on that why? I think that's a brilliant way to sum it up.
And well, I think this is because my background's been when I graduated college and then got into retail management. I was managing businesses within retail, and then started as a photographer. So it means I've got that insight from two quite different specialities. And I see time and time again in Facebook groups and in my consultations with other photographers that the system problems can really interfere with the creativity. It can really interfere with the business enjoyment. If there's an incident with a client or pushback on a contract and you don't have all these things lined up first, it can really consume you. And I understand that photographers are, as creatives, we're maybe more sensitive, and I'm speaking on behalf of photographers. I appreciate not everybody's like that.
Sure.
But those things can really have an impact on your art and your creativity. And I think that having those clear frameworks in place, although they might sound mundane or not the most interesting thing, they almost protect your creativity. And I think as a self-employed sole trader, as an artist, that creativity does need to be almost ring-fenced. It's a term I think I've heard Americans use less than people from the UK, but it's about actually creating a space for that creativity to protect it, to ensure that you can keep delivering on that, and that those mundane paperwork framework things don't end up kind of eating into that, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And it really follows this line of thinking, which we've discussed on the podcast before, which is very simply that artistic prowess or just a focus on the art is not mutually exclusive to or with organization or structure. The great thing is that, as you pointed out, Karen, structure, systems, even if they're very basic, addressing some of the basic components of a business, whether that's the financial management or management of communication, just as a couple of examples. If we put effective and efficient systems in place, the wonderful thing is that we have to worry less, as you pointed out, and we can then have more mental and actual time space in order to focus on our craft. So if we're willing to, just kind of suck it up, right? And put the time, the investment into creating the systems, putting the systems in place. For some of the photographers listening in, they may be into, or at least the beginnings of their busy or semi-busy season now, but we're still relatively early in the year. And there's still an opportunity to lay down a framework for financial management or for the organization of documents and the management of contracts. the management of all the data associated with clients. If you don't have a CRM, taking advantage of a system like Honeybook, for example, are good places to go to get started with those kinds of things. Putting the systems in place now means that you have to think less about those kind of the mundane components of running a business, so that you can then focus on your craft. You can focus on delivering on that why, which again, I'm really stoked on that phrase that you put together earlier. I think that's a brilliant way to sum it up. This is really, really good. Let me jump to another question though. And
Sure.
I'm curious, you've got a business which is focused on teaching and then providing SEO services. There are other companies out there that do this, kind of like Facebook marketing and just social media marketing in general right now. There are so many companies out there that claim to be specialists. So you've got some competition. How do you position your brand against other SEO companies so that you stand out? What is your business's brand position?
Well, first up, I think competition is great. I think it helps everybody keep on their toes, and it's better for clients. You know, if there's competition out there, it means that there's competition to be delivering the best possible service and the best possible client experience. So I'm all good with that. My USP, or kind of, I suppose, what makes things different, everything's highly personalized. So anything I charge for, my chargeable services are all personalized to the client. And I think when it comes to SEO, really, there's a lot of material already out there in courses that, you know, a client could watch hours and hours and hours. A photographer could watch hours of course material, but still not get their questions answered. And sometimes there's not a straight black or white answer. The answer that I might give to someone based in Washington, DC could be quite different from someone based in Middlesbrough in the UK, or the coast in Australia or New Zealand. And I've worked with clients all around the world. So really the done for you services that I offer and the audit course that I offer are highly personalized. All the tutorials are not a paid for part of my service, and they're part of what I want to do to help empower business owners to learn as much about SEO as they can, to put them in the kind of strongest position they can to succeed, really.
And I love that focus on adding value. That's something that we're trying to do here, certainly at Bokeh. As a production of Photographers Edit, you know, there were a lot of companies out there, plenty of companies in the photography industry who, at least for the longest time anyway, were putting in time into blog posts. And I say a lot. I mean, even if there were just a select few, that was kind of the thing to do, was to blog. And while the blogging is certainly helpful for SEO, I mean, you could speak about that more than anyone here, but I wanted to create a different type of content for the sake of adding value. And so that was part of the reason that we've put so much time into Bokeh. And fortunately, along with that, we now have the text to go along with the various Bokeh episodes, and that has seemed to actually made quite a difference for the sake of our SEO. But you mentioned the significance of personalization, which is certainly important. But I would also say too, I'll just throw this out there for your sake. When I go to your website, and for those of you listening in, we'll link to this in the show notes. It is photoseolab.com, just like it sounds, photoseolab.com. And that the name speaks for itself. You are specifically set up to take care of photographers or the photography industry, which immediately puts you in a smaller pool of SEO companies. And that in and of itself acts as a differentiator as well, which is really, really great. And I have to go ahead and point something out while I actually have your website pulled up here in front of me. You mentioned for and I'll let you talk a little bit more about the services in a little bit. You do have various packages that can be purchased, and then I'm sure more custom services, as you alluded to. But one of the great things about your service is that you actually put on the homepage of your website your current available capacity for services. And I think that there are ultimately multiple benefits here. First of all, you are pointing to the significance of providing a great experience for your clients and enabling them to know what you're capable of ahead of time, right? Because the reality is we can take on business, in some cases more than we can handle, and then we can't deliver on that service. So if you scroll the way down to toward the bottom of your page, actually it says SEO client experience and service capacity, and you literally put the capacity there on the website. It's a brilliant idea.
Well, I'm really, integrity is so important to me. And the kind of core values that I've established my wedding photography business with are the same as this business, really, in the sense that I find just being fully transparent and upfront about my aims and where things are at. And the thing is, this business isn't something that I've set up to scale. I want to provide a kind of more of a boutique experience, which is a word less used in the US, but essentially it's a kind of highly personalized experience that I will be personally delivering. And what that means is that there is a maximum capacity and there will be a kind of a limit, but I would rather have a wait list and make sure that when I'm able to serve clients, that they do have a great experience, that they receive they see a return on their investment, and that they have a great learning experience as well, because it's not just about getting results. Getting results is obviously the whole purpose and it's really important, but also feeling supported through that process and being able to learn. And learning can take different times for different people. And I want to be able to have regular contact with clients. I'm talking to clients a couple of times a week in some situations, and to be able to kind of offer that level of service, that I think that's what photographers need, then there does need to be a cap.
But I think it's a great example, again, of something that we've talked here on the podcast about at this point multiple times over, which is the significance of experience. And innate to creating a positive experience is proactively managing expectations. And the fact that it is front and center, you don't even have to log in to an account or anything. Somebody coming to your site immediately knows what your capacity is. And I like that you're proactively managing expectations that way. I think it's a really, really great example for all of us. Talk to us about your SEO company. How did you end up in this place? You alluded to being a wedding photographer. Maybe you can comment on that briefly as well. But what's the backstory of this company?
Well, it was kind of accidental. Even getting into SEO in a start, that was completely accidental. I set up my business down in the southern area of the UK. I moved to Manchester somewhat unexpectedly in 2007. And because I hadn't planned the move, I'd already spent my marketing budget for that year in Glasgow. So I had to set up in a new city very quickly and didn't have any budget. So I started learning SEO. And really that's where things kind of built in terms of my studying SEO and studying Google and kind of getting my work found by potential kind of couples online. So fast forward to 2012 and I was blacklisted from Google. My site was removed from the searches.
Oh,
and
no.
The thing is, I was so busy. I had like 54 weddings in 2012. I didn't even realize till somewhere around about October. 2013 was not one of my best years, if I'm honest. And I had realized that I'd mistakenly made some mistakes with the structure of my website, and I picked up a Panda penalty. Now, penalties back then are a little bit different from now. It's far easier to recover faster. And I had to start over with a brand new site. So in 2013, I spent some months trying to fix things. And then I just thought I need to just start from scratch. So I spent a lot of time studying SEO, but kind of maybe from more reputable sources than I had previously. And I also started using software that checked my site for me, because no business owner listening to this is going to go and check every link in their website weekly. So I realized that I needed to invest in software that would do that for me so that I would spot mistakes before Google did. So when I started over in 2014 with a brand new website, I was able to get over 20 page one rankings within a few months. And that kind of attracted the attention of my competitors. So, or when I say competitors, we're a friendly bunch here in Manchester, and we all kind of help each other out. So I started off with helping friends that I felt were being ripped off through agencies, or I could see that maybe some of these old tactics were still taking place, and I knew how much they'd hurt me, and I didn't want to see any other kind of photographer experience that. So it kind of gradually built from there. I went from helping friends to running a couple of training courses, running some workshops. And then I started working with a US-based agency in December 2016, which was part-time, but kind of escalated. And then that fast forward to the beginning of this year, that agency sadly collapsed through a combination of circumstances. And I found myself in this position where, as a contractor, I just lost my job. But I also there was a whole load of clients who were at various different stages, all kind of reaching out to me for help. And as much as, as someone that had just lost a job and wasn't still working with the company, as much as it wasn't really my responsibility to help them, this takes us back to that why. You know, from a kind of integrity point of view, I couldn't not. And I didn't know how I was going to be able to help them whilst also looking for a job. And it just kind of felt like the right thing to do, to just set up a company to be able to continue to serve those clients that needed my help. And I thought, well, if I can offer the services to new clients as well, then you know what, it's all going to work out, sort of. So that was my kind of aim. So it was really unexpected. It was a real curveball at the start of this year. But I've just kind of rolled with the punches and put a CRM together fairly quickly. You know, I had a phone call to my accountant on a random Wednesday saying, I need some advice. So yeah, I wanted to be able to just do the right thing, to be able to continue to serve those clients who I knew wanted help with their SEO.
Well, I have to give you major props, first of all, for your integrity, your tendency toward organization, your attention to detail, and then ultimately your desire to serve. You know, I mean, the idea of serving or service, this is not something that we hear about a ton these days in modern culture. And I mean, I come from a very kind of strict religious background, and that was a word that you heard in religious circles, but it's not something that you hear as much, it seems like anyway, in modern culture. And I love the fact that you've put so much emphasis on the significance of service. And there is something that is so fulfilling about running a company that is focused around service, truly taking care of somebody, largely because you can empathize with them, right? I love the fact that you come from a photography background, that your experience in SEO is not just from working for another company, an SEO company, but also because you had to do something about your own photography website. I think it's great, but the focus on service is absolutely lovely.
And our backgrounds are quite different, because I grew up in the East End of Glasgow from a completely non-religious background. But the community in that type of area, everybody looked out for each other. You just would not have stood aside whilst you could have done something to help. And community was just so important. And that was at the core of everything. You know, it was an area that was fairly, it's not the most affluent, it's the opposite end of the scale.
Sure.
But I guess growing up in that environment of community over competition, or community, there's strength in community. So there was just no question in my mind. I mean, on paper, it didn't make sense. I should have just went and got a job, you know, and I didn't know, I suppose at that point, exactly the how, or how things would work in practice. But I thought if I put integrity at the center of what I do, and I set up links to continue to answer client questions, to be able to help them at the same time as starting marketing. And I have so much gratitude for the new clients that have placed trust in me, that have invested in me, because I've been able to then invest that money in clients that lost out, you know? So it's kind of, and the thing is that I can empathize so much with their situation. I was so kind of devastated about what happened, because when I was new in business, I lost money from a variety of different companies. You know, there was album companies that went bust. There was kind of marketplace directories that went bust. And when you lose a few £100s when you're new in business, that really hurts. You know, it doesn't matter whether it's a few $100s or a couple of thousand. It's still painful. So I wanted to just be able to kind of do what I could to offset that as much as possible, and also really give those clients the results that they were looking for. I knew I had the skills to do that. I mean, it's a fairly niche thing that I've got experience in. So I figured, you know, we're all here in this mess. Let's do something about it.
I love it. Well, I'm a huge fan already. And of course, we're going to link to your website, photoseolab.com, in the show notes for those of you who are curious to learn more. But let's get into kind of our focus for the day. And, you know, I don't think I actually said or spelled it out. SEO, search engine optimization, is what we're talking about today. And if I were to sum it up from my lack of experience as an SEO specialist, I would say this is basically how to set up your website in such a way that a potential client can organically find you through a search online. Would that be a fair summation?
Absolutely. And it's more powerful than it ever was. The developments in technology are awesome, really, and really powerful. And something that gets talked a lot about within the photography community is about targeting ideal clients. Because, you know, there's such a vast array of styles. And I think, and this is something you will have experienced as well, Nathan, the difference in editing styles. You know, the progress in technology has enabled photographers to really kind of express themselves through a kind of more nuanced editing and different looks, and to kind of create more impactful art. I think you'd agree.
Yeah, for sure. There is such a wide range of styles, and of course, ultimately, the question is how can you make the world aware of your particular style effectively, and ultimately draw in the right client. And it's interesting you talk about the progress of technology and the ability to be able to target a particular potential client. And my mind automatically in that case really goes to Facebook. I mean, Facebook's developed these incredible tools for the sake of running ads in a very targeted manner. And on that note, I'm curious, and this may be a bit rhetorical, but is SEO, what significance, I guess, does SEO still carry in a day when we do have a platform, an ad platform more specifically, like Facebook, or we have a platform like Instagram? How relevant is SEO still in 2019?
Well, I think let's first look at how the algorithms work. One algorithm in particular, which is Hummingbird. So Hummingbird's a natural language processor. And what it does is crawl all the text content on the page. So it's looking at headings, subheadings, alt text, the natural body copy, which is just normal text to everyone. What it does is identify entities within that text. And it looks at the relationship between those entities to calculate the kind of context and intent. So it's so much further advanced than just having a list of keywords. It's more about topical relevance. So if you have a wedding that you've photographed and maybe you weren't that keen in the venue, but there was aspects of it that you would love to shoot more weddings that had those aspects. By focusing on those within the text, you're going to really help Hummingbird kind of play matchmaker with getting your site in front of your target client, because search is personalized. So if you've been, and you'll know if you've been searching for something and then you start seeing adverts that are targeted towards you based on your previous search.
Right.
If you've got maybe a potential, or like a bride or a couple have been searching for wedding barns, and they've been searching for rustic styling or details for barn weddings, or they've been searching for words in that kind of topic. And then you have a load of content on your website where you're using those similar terms. Google's going to be showing your site over a competitor because you're going to look more relevant to that client.
So I guess very simply, and by the way, when you were talking about Hummingbird, is that specific to a Google search, or does that? Yeah,
Google's got a range of algorithms. So there's different algorithms that do different things. So Hummingbird is the kind of language processor side of things.
But that is specific to Google, not other search engines?
That's right. But I mean, really, when we talk search engines, we're pretty much talking Google because they've got more than 90% share. So
it is true. And just to be specific, and I alluded to this earlier, but we are talking about organic search here, not Google AdWords, which is a whole other topic in and of itself. That's a whole other
topic. Yeah, I'm a big fan of organic search because essentially once you've optimized your site to be found by the people that you'd like to find it, there's no additional investment. So although there's a time investment to start off with, you don't have to keep throwing money at it. So if you want to continue to run Facebook ads, as much as you will, no doubt see a return on that investment, you do have to keep paying. Whereas in organic search, I've not invested in, I think the last time I spent any money in AdWords was 4 years ago.
Yeah, we've experimented with it as well at Photographers Edit specifically, and just we haven't seen the results. And I don't know how long at this point. I mean, years really since we've seen effective ROI on AdWords. But the results that we're seeing from SEO are quite significant. The percentage of new accounts that we get at Photographers Edit through organic Google search now is, and particularly in 2018, if I look back at our statistics, are quite significant. So to that point, though, I'm curious, first of all, if you just kind of break down maybe what the big differences are in 2019 in SEO versus, say, 8 to 10 years ago, because we may have some listeners that have been photographers for years now. I mean, I've been in the industry for close to 20 years. How have things changed in the last 8 to 10 years?
Well, I think one thing is in terms of Google's penalties, where 10 years ago, if you were hit by like a penalty, then it would take a lot longer to recover. And you might be looking at 6 or 12 months. Whereas based on the sorry letters I have sent Google on behalf of clients, I found it's been much easier to be able to recover from that sort of thing. So what I would say is if you have been you're listening to this and you have perhaps engaged or maybe even hired a company that's engaged in non-ideal practices like, link farms and things,
I love how you say non-ideal. That's such a wonderfully soft way to put that.
If you've misbehaved, basically. It's easier to recover. So if it's something where you feel like you've been hit by a penalty, I've spoke to photographers who say, oh, there's no point trying to do anything with my site. And I'm like, you know what, you can. Google will give you another chance. Just clear things up, resubmit for fresh index, and you can get good at writing sorry letters. So
okay, but this is something I'm curious about, because I'm not sure if I'm even aware of this notion of penalties from Google. I don't think it's something that I've ever run into with any of the companies I've been involved in. Can you explain just a little bit more?
Yeah, well, I suppose I tend to speak to clients when they're either wondering why they don't rank anymore, or they want to rank well in search, in the first place. So I tend to kind of probably disproportionately speak to people that have more of that sort of problem. What I would, and this kind of maybe brings us on to Google Search Console, I would highly recommend that photographers do monitor their site performance through Google Search Console. If Google does give you a penalty, depends on what type, then it would be through that they would communicate that with you. But often I find clients don't know they've got penalties. So it's only when I start delving into things and I say, oh, I've got this message from Google. Or I can see the kind of the impact of a penalty. So although Google might not have necessarily sent them a message about it, there's kind of footprints that penalties leave that are quite distinct. And I guess being a bit of a Uber geek, I'm kind of familiar with recognizing what those look like.
What's an example of something that Google would give a penalty for?
So, for example, if you have created content that's all very similar, so you might have, and there's a recent example of a client that I'm working with just now who has created blog posts all targeted towards the same kind of core keyword that she was targeting her homepage on. Now, with very little text content and lots of similarity, which kind of looks like a bit spammy, then that's the sort of thing that can pick up a Panda penalty, because having too many low quality pages that aren't serving searcher intent, which is a really important thing in 2019, so we'll come on to that shortly. You can end up with a penalty where you're just not going to be able to rank your pages unless you take a major kind of strategy change.
Huh. Okay. This is such a topic that is quite foreign to me, I guess, ultimately, when we start talking about the technical details. So I love that I can go to you as the expert for this information. But let's go ahead. And I know we're going to get into how photographers can ultimately improve what they're doing when it comes to SEO here in just a bit, but a couple of more differences. Initially, you mentioned the difference, one of the big differences between now SEO in 2019 and, say 8 to 10 years ago is the difference in the way that Google handles penalties. You have the ability to be able to more quickly recover. What's another big difference?
Mobile first indexing. Such a kind of contrast in the experience of looking at something on a kind of a desktop screen or a laptop, which is still over 30% of market share, and looking at a site on a mobile. So it's a completely different user experience, really. And it means that sites need to load way faster. And kind of, there's various aspects I think that photographers have hung on to, like slideshows, for example. You're not going to watch a slideshow on a website on a mobile. You're just not going to, let's just be realistic.
Well, yeah, the reality is that most of us probably have just a shorter attention span, correct?
Yeah, it's a combination of factors, and the data that I've looked at on hundreds and hundreds of websites backs that up, really. You've really only got a couple of seconds of someone's attention, and it's about really kind of engaging that person and drawing them into your site, getting them to engage with your content and start navigating around it. So watching a slideshow isn't necessarily what people are going to expect when they land on your site. You might want to put a slideshow in your portfolio section, but not your homepage, not right at the start, because if you've only got a couple of seconds of someone's attention and your site takes 6 seconds to load, you've lost that client.
Wow.
That's, they're gone. So I see sites that take way too long to load and no one gets to see their work. It's heartbreaking. So by speeding things up and making things really efficient, and then maybe creating slideshows on pages that might be part of the internal navigation, you've already got them there, then they're already kind of hooked. They've already seen your brand. They've already started bonding with the message, the vibe that you have on your site. So it means that you're going to have a bit more patience maybe from that potential client for something to load.
So what would you say would be a recommended load time for, at least for a mobile site these days?
Less than 2 seconds.
Wow. Okay. So you mentioned earlier the Google Search Console. That's a great place that our listeners can go to get an idea of how quickly their site is loading, correct?
No, Google Search Console is more about the performance of the site and what Google's actually delivering the different pages.
Okay.
What queries it's delivering the pages for. A tool that I'd recommend for checking your load speed time would be GTmetrix. So no affiliation with them, by the way. I just think it's the best thing out there. There's some features on that tool that show you the load time of different elements. So if you want to be able to really kind of target elements of your site that are slowing things down, that tool makes it really clear. And I'm all for clarity and transparency. So it's just gtmetrix.com. Now, the default server is in Vancouver. So that's only going to work if you're based over in the US. So what I would say is you can register for a free account and change the location to London or Dallas, and it will give you a more realistic result. So my recommendation is if you can get your site to load under 2 seconds, ideally that's what Google's going to be kind of happy with. But less than 3 for a photographer is acceptable. Any more than 3 and you've got work to do.
Wow. And would you say that that's the case still for a desktop website? Because one of the interesting statistics that I just recently saw on our site, I looked at, I guess, fresh numbers, was the large disparity really between those who are, I would assume that more photographers were looking at Photographers Edit's website on the mobile platform. And the reality was it was quite the opposite. Most people that come to our site are doing so on their desktop. Do we still need a 2 to 3 second load time?
Absolutely. I think people's expectation and patience has changed. And we just expect things faster. So I think with photographers, there's a little bit more leeway there because, a site's going to have photos on it. But if you keep someone loading it, if you think the last time you waited for 6 or 7 seconds for a website to load,
it feels like forever.
And the thing is as well with the whole, there's things in the news about security and hacking. A potential client might think that your site's been hacked or might think that there's some sort of underlying problem, or maybe they've clicked on something they shouldn't. So there's a kind of different environment now than there was 10 years ago. People are more savvy to things like risk and security, and trust signals are really so important. So I think that aiming for less than 3 seconds across the board is what everybody should be kind of aiming for.
Wow. Okay. I know that we've got a lot of work to do in that realm. That's good to know. Let's get to, are there any other significant differences? We talked about the difference in penalties and the ability to be able to more quickly recover, mobile first indexing, the significance of quick load times. Anything else that you see as a significant difference between now and say 8 to 10 years ago?
And I think it's kind of what we touched on a little previously with algorithms. They're so much more advanced now than they used to be, and I see photographers not using that technology. So I think technology is there. Talk about the types of weddings that you would love to shoot. Talk details. I think when you make things kind of more from the perspective of a photographer, then that's great if you're delivering content to photographers. But if you're aiming to deliver content to potential couples that are planning a wedding, then what you're creating needs to match the searcher intent. Which is going to kind of bring us on to some next points in terms of recommendations I have. But it's so important more than ever for content to be really great quality. Writing short 200 or 300 word articles anymore doesn't really cut it. The web's flooded with that type of thing. So it's more, I think compared to 10 years ago, that the emphasis is more on quality over quantity. I don't recommend that my clients blog twice a week, which was a common thing being recommended by agencies like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, definitely. It's more about kind of thorough in-depth articles that match search intent, that are kind of researched and relevant and that are great quality.
Wow. Okay. All right. This is good stuff already. And
bit of a shift change.
Well, and you already alluded to some information that you're going to share with us, because my next question has it's a 2-part question, really. I'm curious from your perspective, what you would say are some of the most significant mistakes that photographers are making right now when it comes to SEO. And then maybe you could just briefly share some potential solutions there, because ultimately what I'd really like is for those listening in, if they need help with SEO, search engine optimization, to be able to come to you as the expert. But let's at least delve into these a little bit. What are some of the most significant mistakes and the solutions therein?
Well, I think one of the main things is putting too much of a kind of high priority in the homepage. And I know I've just said there about load times, and load times are really important, but really 75% of traffic should be arriving through blog posts. Because if you are targeting something with your homepage, you can't target everything with it. And the blog posts and the mix of blog posts on your site should reflect a balanced strategy that is targeting your potential clients at different points in the buying cycle. So what that means is there needs to be a variety that respond to search intent at different points on that potential client's journey. So by optimizing posts for different things, you're going to be able to rank for a much, much wider range of different subjects. That's going to attract more traffic to your site. But it also means that you need to be thinking about blog posts as that might be the first kind of interaction with your brand. So if someone's just opening a blog post for the first time, are they clear about the service that the photographer provides? Is there a call to action on that page? Are there internal links to other areas that a potential client may want to go check out? So it's really kind of thinking about a blog post as alternative homepages, sort of, where there's those key kind of call to actions, internal links, and also clarity about what the photographer offers. Using some of the tools online to look at blog post content, photographers can end up looking like hobbyists, because there's nothing there about them offering a professional service.
Wow.
It's more about a wedding day story.
That's interesting. I wouldn't have made that connection, I guess. I mean, the focus is on story, and I'm still amazed at the number of pictures that some photographers will share too. But I think in many cases, the copy is probably lacking, right? And you mentioned repetitive content earlier. There's a tendency that photographers have to kind of use the same text, the same phrases over and over and over and over again. But the reality is that there needs to be, I guess, more specific allusion to or reference to the professional photography service. And I like the way that you summed it up, saying that, hey, this blog may actually be their first point of connection with you. So while the content there is significant, we need to make sure that it is very clear the service that's being offered with it.
Absolutely. And I think really kind of almost a bit of a shift change in what the purpose of the blog is, and maybe a little bit of a step away from it's to share the story of the day, but also what is that potential client looking for, and what can you share with your experience as a photographer that would answer questions that they're already asking Google. Because the client just doesn't need to be, a blog post doesn't need to just be about one thing. It can be multifaceted. There can be a topic rather than one little small subject. So if you're creating a post about a venue, there's different aspects of that venue where you can share your expertise, and sharing expertise kind of builds trust, builds authority. It reassures potential couples, which is what they want. If they're looking for a photographer to book, they want to be working with someone who's not only passionate about what they do, but also experienced and able to offer maybe some advice and suggestions. So using that space to do that is ideal. Whereas what I see a lot of is, I rocked up at the wedding in the morning, and then we had the ceremony. There's no depth. There's no offering kind of advice or answering questions. And I think really putting the users at the center of what you do will help guide you. If you're a photographer listening to this and you're thinking, what on earth to create content on? Well, there's keyword research tools. I've got a couple of tutorials on the website that show you how to kind of install some tools that will help empower you to kind of have that information to find out what users are actually searching for. And when I, in the live kind of one-to-one consultations that I do, I walk through installing these with clients. And right away, they're always like, well, I wouldn't have thought that they've been searching for that type of thing, but that makes sense now. And it's not anything that's kind of revelationary or that photographers won't be able to share, but it's just having that information and knowing what it is so that they can then answer those questions that are already being asked.
Oh, I know that this is going to end up being one of the most practical episodes that we've had here on Bokeh. And those listening in, I'm going to be promoting this like crazy. So I hope that you're taking notes. There's a lot of information I know that Karen is sharing right now that is going to be quite applicable, and you're probably going to have a lot of homework to get started with right away. So thank you. I'm already excited, Karen, and we're only just one point into these mistakes and solutions. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one. You said the first one is too much priority on the homepage, the significance of the blog as an entry point, realizing that we also need to have clear reference to the service being offered, an establishment of expertise in conjunction with the stories that we're sharing. What's another potential mistake that photographers are making when it comes to SEO?
Well, I did kind of naturally flowed into point two, sort of in that explanation there, which kind of the second point I wanted to share was around search intent, because creating content that doesn't match the search intent online means that not only do brides and grooms not get the information they're looking for, but photographers don't get the traffic. So you can talk about something that interests you all you like, but if there's no audience, you're standing alone in an empty room. And what I see from photographers is maybe I get to speak to people when they're at a point in their business where they don't know whether to keep going. They don't know whether they think, is it their work? Is it them? But actually, it's just that they're talking to themselves. People aren't searching for what they're actually writing about. And what I've kind of been able to do with my clients is by creating that shift change and matching what they do to what people are searching for means that they can get a ton of traffic on their site. And that leads to conversions and, booked jobs of kind of, whether it's weddings or kind of other types of photography. So really kind of aligning the content with users is just so, so important. And that kind of, I have a keyword research tutorial on that. But I'd also encourage photographers to use other free tools like Google Trends. If you want to know what people are talking about, you can go to Google Trends and find out. And also just using search. When you start typing anything in, Google comes up with a load of suggested phrases. So by using that, you can see what people are asking. And that will help you align your content to kind of be responding to that need, really.
Yeah, because it is easy to write content that we are interested in. I like that you make that point, that we write content that we're interested in, but isn't necessarily relevant to our target client. And there are tools that we can actually take advantage of, as you're suggesting. So we'll make sure to link to these tools that you're referencing in the show notes as well. But when you say search intent, basically we need to do a better job of matching content to the interests of our target client. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And the thing is, as photographers, we are experts in the different aspects of photography that a client might not even know that they don't know, because they've not planned a wedding before. Maybe not had a newborn shoot before, so they don't know what to ask. So what I do myself on my wedding website, which is out there for anyone to see, and what I recommend to my clients is that we mix in what we want to talk about with what the user wants to know. So you might answer a user question first, and then you add in something that you know is important that they might not have even thought about yet. And then you add in some more details that you know that users are searching for. So you kind of pepper in this sharing of expertise at the same time as responding to kind of that user intent, really, the what people are asking Google.
I love that. It's not an either or situation. We can have best of both
absolutely
worlds.
Both. Absolutely both. There's no compromising.
That's great. Okay. All right. So take us to another mistake that photographers are making with SEO.
So this is something that's more pertinent to wedding photographers. And it's the whole concept that you need photos to blog or waiting to blog. So let's just take a step back from this for a moment. Google has come out and said that it takes between 4 and 12 months for SEO work to kind of bear fruition.
Wow.
Yeah, and because the web has been flooded with lots of kind of fairly low quality short blog articles, it takes longer now for posts to gain traction than it did maybe 10 years ago. So with wedding photography, clients book so far in advance. My recommendation is, and this is something I see that's not happening, that I recommend that clients do, and any photographer listening to this actually, blog in advance. So you could quite easily write a blog post about the venue a year before the wedding, and you could create content about the venue, about your intention of shooting the wedding, how you plan to approach the day, the different aspects that you might plan for weather contingency plans. You might even video yourself at the venue saying, I've come to check out the venue and have a good look round. We're looking for some inspiration of how we're going to use the space at the same time of year. And by doing that, not only do you share your passion for creating art, but you also share your personality. And people book people. We don't kind of buy products. We buy people. So really kind of by putting that out there already, not only will it help you book future weddings, but it also means that it's reassuring for current clients and also gives a chance for your work to really start gaining traction. So the time you shot the wedding and you can then drop the photos into the blog post, you're in a much better position to then be able to gain more bookings.
Interesting. Okay, so I would never have thought about this idea before, but you're actually talking about retroactively putting photos in after you shoot that particular event. And then, I guess using WordPress, if we've updated the post, then you can republish it and then it comes to the top?
Yeah, you can change the date. So it's really important within your permalink structure, getting a bit geeky now, that you don't have the dates in there. It's also really important that you do not use names, which we'll come to that in a minute. So you want the URL to be neutral enough that you can do that with it. You don't want to be creating a URL that then wouldn't make sense after you've shot the wedding.
Wow. Okay. This is good. I've got
strategy.
Yeah, strategy. But I'm just thinking there's so much work that we need to go do to refine. This is good, really wonderful advice.
This is what my clients say. They kind of think we've achieved lots, but I appear to have a homework list.
I have a significant homework list here already. Okay, so we started with too much priority on the homepage, and of course, ultimately the significance of creating a blogging home, if you will, that isn't just wedding story centric or portrait story centric, but ultimately a place where potential clients can find value and ultimately link to the services that you're offering. And then making sure that the content that we are producing for the website and more specifically the blog is relevant to the type of content that's being searched by our target clients. And so that was number 2. And then 3, the significance of, or I guess the lack of significance really of photos from that particular event in order for us to blog. If this is true, if we're talking about 10 to 12 months, let's say, before the work that we've done, the SEO work that we've done, the blog content that we have produced is going to have an impact on our searchability, then going ahead and creating a blog post ahead of time and then dropping in the photo and stories after the fact. This is not a strategy I've heard of it before, but that would make a lot more sense in that context.
And it's something, Nathan, I've been doing this since 2007. When I arrived in Manchester in the situation that I did, and I didn't have any weddings locally. So I had to think about that kind of order of who gets booked first. And clients have to book venues before they can book a photographer. So I created content for around different venues, and because I didn't have any photos to share, I drove around to some of the venues and shot kind of just exterior photos of them. But then I illustrated the article with other wedding photos that I had, and I used some interior photos from venues that were maybe similar. So I might say, well, this venue in Glasgow has a kind of similar interior to whatever hall it was. And I get quite a lot of pushback when I tell clients this, but that's how I got booked up. Because when you create content, and it's not about being misleading to people. Because if you're just kind of authentic and say, I'd love to shoot at this venue. I've not shot a wedding there yet. Here's how I would like to use the space. Here's my vision of what I'd like to do there. And here's some other photos that are kind of similar. Then that builds there's an authenticity and trust in that. And there's also enthusiastic kind of passion for your job. And really that's something that, a potential couple that's excited about their wedding, that sees someone who really wants to shoot at a venue, that, they're going to love that. That's worked for me as recently as last year when there was an abbey in, it's a valley about an hour north of the city where I live. And I hadn't shot there before. And it's like a few 100-year-old kind of ruined abbey type thing. And it's beautiful, but it's been on my kind of list of places I'd like to shoot in a while. And I literally just put on my Ribble Valley page on my website that I really wanted to shoot there. And It was somewhere that hadn't been previously, and only wrote a few lines, but that was enough for the venue to find me in search results, read that. They called me and they said, we're having a wedding fair here. Do you want to come along? So I went to the wedding fair, and a couple booked me that weren't able to attend the wedding fair because they lived in London, but they'd seen that I was there and seen on my website that I really wanted to shoot there. And I've been able to shoot at other venues without having any wedding work. I've been able to get on page 1 for weddings for venues, even though I've not shot a wedding there.
Wow.
So yeah, which goes down well with the locals, as you can imagine. So really just, I think as photographers, we can kind of get in the way of ourselves and make up these rules of, I need to do this before I do this, or I need to do A, B, and C. I need to, no, you don't, you really don't. It's not true. You're wrong.
Well, we appreciate the fact that you're here to share those mistakes with us. And speaking of, I know that you've got a couple more. So do list those for us.
I do.
Yeah.
Okay. So another thing is taking the names out of titles. Oh my goodness. I see this in so many blog posts. So when you create a title and you create content, you may well be creating that so that the couple that you've worked with, can see their photos online and they're famous, they're on your blog. But the problem is you don't want to rank for those names, and Rachel and Andy or whatever their names are, that doesn't mean anything to Google. There's no context there. So there shouldn't be any names in URLs, any names in titles either. So the title should be more about descriptions of styling, the details of the day. And I encourage photographers to go and look at some of the international blogs out there. Things like Style Me Pretty, Rock and Roll Bride, and look at the titles, and they're all descriptive details, and that is what's going to help you get your ideal client. I remember having lots of brides of a similar name, and at one point in 2008 I was on page 1 for the name Rachel. And
what are the chances?
No, it was ridiculous, and it didn't help me get any wedding bookings, Nathan. Right. I know that might surprise you, but so it's really thinking about, again, it comes back to search intent. You need to be creating content for your future couples that you've not met yet.
Wow. Okay. So is Google going to be looking at not just the text content in that blog post, that the I think you said earlier that the body text or the body content, but it's also looking at the associated URL and the words in that URL?
Yeah, it's looking at the relationship of everything.
Wow.
So in kind of analyzing the context and intent, everything's kind of analyzed really. So it's fine to use a couple names in the post, but really the kind of your headings and subheadings within the kind of the article that you create or the blog that you create, they should be based around answering questions that people are answering search. So it's more maybe you do want to be using words like bride and groom, or bride and bride, groom and groom, or kind of couple and ceremony. You want to make sure that you're using words that make it clear to Google. So because I see some posts where the names are used a lot, and the kind of the way that post is interpreted, it can look as if it's just about a person. So you end up seeing posts ranking for famous people that are nothing to do with anything. Huh. And you can find that out and this is the benefit of monitoring things in Search Console, because you can see how Google's understanding a post. And as much as the technology is it's so advanced, it can get things wrong. And as much as photographers don't want to be keyword spamming, sometimes they can end up being like that with names without realizing it.
Who knew? Wow, that's really interesting. And I know that, wow, this is, again, something that we need to add to our homework list for the content at Photographers Edit, because I would not have thought that was an issue. That's really interesting. Okay, I want to respect your time and everyone else's time too. I know that we've gone just a little bit over an hour already. Take us to the last mistake and the potential solution here before we finish up.
Okay, so this would be around, I don't know if it's a term that you use in the US as much, around hoarding. So I see established photographers that have maybe been going for, 5 years or more, sometimes, 10 years. And what they do is just hang on to every single blog post. And they end up creating a bit of a monster. So they'll come to me and say, my site's not performing anymore and I don't know why. And I'll find 400 blog posts and 1,500 tag pages and a whole hot mess that Google can't even crawl. So I would say periodically, you need to have a bit of a brutal cull. So websites as a whole should be pruned every single thing on your website needs to be within 3 clicks of the homepage. I'll let that sink in.
And I was going to say, I like that pause there, because that's a major statement. 3 clicks of the homepage. And I mean, can you be more specific in what context? What does that actually look like in a very practical level?
So when you start from the homepage, which is kind of level 0,
yeah,
you should be able to access or navigate to every single blog on a website within 3 clicks. So what that means is you need a really kind of clear architecture and kind of structure of your website. So often the work that I'm doing is increasing the actual ability for a website to be crawled. So it's almost like if you imagine a kind of farmhouse that's had various extensions added over the years, and comparing that to a planned kind of house with clear navigation. I like using analogies in my coaching. But often sites are underperforming because Google can't crawl them. They're just impossible to crawl. Everybody's got a certain amount of crawl budget, and it might take months for a bot to work its way through a site.
Wow. Okay. So, but I wouldn't have thought that we needed to actually go back and cull, for example, and I'm just continuing to use my company and Bokeh as an example here, but I can think about the 200 plus posts associated with the Bokeh Podcast, which is the primary content, or the content that we post to our so-called blog. It is the podcast and the show notes and so forth, but we've got over 200 episodes. So the idea of clicking, landing on the homepage of the Photographer's Edit website, clicking on podcast, in order to get to these other posts, it would take so many clicks. You're suggesting that those be culled down to, are there a certain number of pages that photographers should keep in mind they should be limiting their blogs to?
Well, I think because it depends on the business and the scale of the business, and sometimes it's more about restructuring than culling. If you've got a load of valuable content on there, as your website does, it's amazing. I think it would be more of an approach of a restructuring or reorganizing of content to make it kind of easy to get to rather than cull. I think with photography, because things do change over the years, I tend to keep my website between 100 and 120 posts. And I'm in year 13, actually year 14. So, I've shot 407 weddings so far. But really from kind of what I'm wanting to aim for, I've found that amount of content means my site's easy to crawl, and it keeps it nimble. It keeps it kind of accessible and performing well, which is just, it's such a kind of understood thing. It's so important. So really that kind of crawlability and indexability, and just accessibility for our user as well.
Okay, so we need to avoid hoarding. That's a good thing. I like that as a principle in life anyway, but we can even be or should be minimalist when it comes to the content in our blog.
It's a transferable habit.
Yeah, that's really, really good. Okay, wow. There's so much information here, and I know, again, that we've just barely scratched the surface, because probably each of these points we could have spent an hour on or more. But I love the practicality of this conversation, Karen, and I'm just a big fan of you and what you're doing anyway. I really appreciate you making time to send this knowledge our way, and to of course, to our listeners. I'm
well, thank you so much for having me.
It's truly been a privilege, and I'd love for you just one more time to reiterate where our listeners can find you online, your website, social media, ideally how they can maybe get started using your services as well.
So the kind of main hub is the website, which is photoseolab.com, as you've said. I also have a YouTube channel there's a ton of free tutorials that are going to be getting released on there over the coming weeks, which I'm really excited about. Kind of core things around link building and how to set up Search Console and analytics, and just kind of geeky stuff that I love talking about, but I know that will really make a difference. I've also got a Facebook page, which again, just Photo SEO Lab, and I do live kind of tutorials and Q&A and just sharing SEO news, nuggets and things that are going to benefit the community. And then there's the services as well. So the training course that I do is based around kind of audits. So that's something that if people wanted to find out more about, there'll be more information on my site in the next week or so. And yeah, I have a free demo button through the site. So if anybody wants to chat with me about how we could work together, you can just book a demo call. We can have a chat. We'll try and keep it not too geeky.
Well, and you alluded to this, I think maybe at the beginning of our conversation, but you actually keep hours that make working with US-based clients relatively easy.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I'm kind of on a CST time zone anyway, Nathan. I don't really, I'm more of a night owl than mornings. So I've got clients in Australia that I tend to have my coaching calls with them at midnight my time,
wow.
11 p.m. my time. Yeah, but it's something that with working with a US agency for the last couple of years, it's really kind of felt like it's really just fitted how I work anyway. You know, when I edit, I tend to edit till about 1 or 2 in the morning. And I'm not a fan of mornings. So it kind of just works. I've got clients in the Pacific time zone at the moment, and throughout the US already. So the kind of scheduler is actually set to CST time zone, but you can adjust it for your own time zone when you book in with me.
Well, and for those of you listening in who are curious too, one of the things that Karen puts priority on is actually having conversation. I'm putting face-to-face in air quotes here, but face-to-face Zoom video call. So you actually get a chance to see the person and have a conversation with them. And I think that's really, really great too. But we'll make sure to link to your website and Facebook in the show notes. For those of you listening in, go to Bokeh, Bokeh podcast.com. Speaking of the content that we produce for our blog, that's where you're going to find it. And of course, the other shows and their show notes as well. You can find there at bokehpodcast.com. Thank you again, Karen, so much for making time for the Bokeh Podcast listeners today.
Thanks so much. It's been great chatting with you.
Thanks so much for listening to the Bokeh Podcast today. Will you let us know what you think by leaving a review of the podcast in iTunes or maybe in the Apple Podcast app? And I'd love to hear from you personally with your thoughts about the podcast, maybe suggestions about future topics and guests for the show. My direct email is nathan@photographersedit.com. The Bokeh Podcast is brought to you by Photographers Edit, custom image editing for the wedding and portrait photographer. Just visit photographersedit.com.